Well, good morning, family. It's great to be again with you and to share some more about Foster's Home, but also to look at our families. And I think if you would go into any bookstore, even Christian bookstore nowadays, you can go into it and walk and look through the aisles and see the books there, and you'll see this word dysfunctional. You'll see titles of books, how to deal with the dysfunctional family, or what to do with dysfunctional parents, or all this word dysfunctional that comes up. You'll see that. I think if you think about it, dysfunctionality really is not something new. It's not a new concept. It's existed ever since Adam and Eve. Ever since sin has entered into the world, dysfunctional has happened. We live in a dysfunctional society. We are dysfunctional people. We sin. Dysfunctional is who we are. And so I want you to think about that, because even within our own families, even if we have good families, there's a trait of always dysfunctionality in there. And it's not a bad thing, because we have a God, and we'll look at this later, who can work even with dysfunctionality in the lives of people. So we're going to look at families, we're going to look at dysfunctionality in there, and we're going to see what God can do with that. We're going to look at Genesis 21, is where we're going to open our Bibles today, Genesis 21. We know the story of Abraham. We know his time with God. We know he's called by God to be something great, to be the father of many nations, to be God's chosen people. And God calls Abraham for something special, something wonderful. But Abraham's family is a little bit dysfunctional. There's something that happens there, again, because of sin that enters, that creates a dysfunctional family within the family of Abraham. So we know God called Abraham to be the father of many nations, but we don't know how that's going to happen. Abraham and Sarah are old in age. And so Abraham takes upon himself, even before we get to Genesis chapter 21, we see Abraham trying to figure this out. How is this going to happen? And so he makes his servant, Eliezer of Damascus, he says, "You're going to be my son." And God comes and says, "No, Abraham, that's not how it's going to happen. I have it under control. Trust me, have faith in me. You're going to be the father of many nations." And then Sarah has a great idea of how this is going to happen. She gives her servant, her maidservant from Egypt, over to Abraham and says, "This is how we're going to have a family. This is how we're going to fulfill the promise that God has given to us. You're going to have a child with her." And so that's where Ishmael comes into the picture. And it's interesting for me to see that when God makes a promise, we feel like we have to work at it to make it come about. Think about that in your own lives. When God makes a promise to us, we feel we have to make it happen. And we don't trust God to make it happen. I'm guilty of that. I'm here before you saying I've done that too. But that's the beauty of how God works. He works even with that. And we're going to see that in the life of Abraham. I don't know what happened with Sarah and Hagar, her servant. I don't know all the family dynamics that are going on within this family. But in chapter 16, a little bit before where we get to in chapter 21, something's happening between Hagar and Sarah, where Sarah becomes very ill-willed, very despises Hagar for some reason. And it gets to the point that it's so bad that Hagar feels she needs to leave with her son from that family because she just cannot take it anymore. I don't know what happened. But imagine yourselves in Hagar's shoes. Imagine yourself getting to the point where you feel you have to leave because of tension between and in your family. An angel of God comes to Hagar and comforts her and says, "Go back home. Go back home." And so Hagar does. Again, God is there with you, but you're living day in and day out with a dysfunctional family. And so we get to chapter 21. We get to the time when the promised child is here, is coming. Isaac is here amongst the family. And so let's see what it says. It says, "Now the Lord was gracious to Sarah, and he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah what he had promised. And Sarah became pregnant and bore a son to Abraham in his old age, at the very time God had promised him. Abraham gave the name of Isaac to that son Sarah bore him. And when the son Isaac was 8 days old, Abraham circumcised him, and as God commanded. Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. Sarah said, 'Go, God has brought me laughter, and everyone who hears about this will laugh with me.' And she added, 'Who would have said to Abraham and Sarah would have nursed children? And yet I bore him a son in his old age.' And the child grew and was weaned, and on the day Isaac was weaned, Abraham had a great feast." Excitement is in the house. Isaac is born. After all these years of waiting, of trying to maybe figure out how this is going to look like, of creating a dysfunctional family, the promise has come. Isaac is here. Our family is complete. This is to be a joyous occasion, right? God has promised something, and it has happened. And now our family is all united together. Great things are going to happen. I think within our own families, we have that excitement of when a new child comes. I think every time we get to hold a newborn baby, there's excitement. And there's a new beginning that happens. But time and time goes on, that excitement wears away. And you come back into your family and what has happened. How do we not lose that? How do we not lose that excitement of our family every day, that joy that needs to be there in our families? Because it's an exciting time for Abraham and his family, but there's some other people in his family that this is going to start creating some problems. Let's continue reading verse 9. But Sarah saw that the son from Hagar the Egyptian had born to Abram was mocking. And she said to Abraham, "Get rid of this slave woman and her son, for that slave woman's son will never share in the inheritance with my son Isaac." The matter distressed Abraham greatly because it concerned his son. So imagine yourself, your wife comes to you and saying, "I do not care about this son anymore. Even though it was my decision and my choice to have this son the way that I did, I do not want him anymore here. I do not want him part of this family. My slave woman and the son need to go. I do not want him part of my family any longer." And these are the people of God. Interesting to think about. The matter distressed Abraham, verse 11, greatly, because it concerned his son. But God said to him, do not be distressed about the boy and your maidservant. Listen to whatever Sarah tells you. Because it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. And I will make the son of the maidservant into a nation also, because he is your offspring. Early the next morning, Abraham took some food and a skin of water and gave it to Hagar. And he set them on her shoulders, and then sent her off with the boy. She went on her way and wandered in the desert of Beersheba. And when the water and the skin was gone, she put the boy under one of those bushes. And then she went off and sat down nearby, about a bow shot away for she thought, I cannot watch the boy die. And as she sat there nearby, she began to sob. And God heard the boy crying, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, what is the matter, Hagar? Do not be afraid. God has heard the boy's crying as he lies there. Lift the boy up and take him by the hand, for I will make him a great nation. What has just happened that morning? What has just happened? Abraham giving Hagar and his own son some food, some water, and pretty much saying, here's the door. You're going to have to leave. That day, Ishmael got kicked out of his own home, out of his own family. How would you feel? Ishmael had nothing to do with this. How would you feel? Ishmael had to leave his home, his father. That was his father. His only father that he knew. Told him that day, you're going to have to leave. How would we feel? This is a picture of Roxanne and Jennifer. They grew up at Foster's home in the mid-80s and 90s. Roxanne and Jennifer had a lot that happened in their lives. Abuse. You can think about it, it happened. And they come to Foster's home, have a struggle, have a hard time fitting in and trying to work through the problems that happened to them. But one day Roxanne has to leave school because of some issues that were happening there. And back then, when you had to leave school, you had to wait in the offices before your whole family came back from school, before you could go back to your home. And so Roxanne writes a letter, unbeknownst to us. Later on, we see it in our computer system. A letter that she writes sharing of that day when she was kicked out of school. And we're going to read it together. We left it exactly how she wrote it. But I want you to think about this, because this might be just how Ishmael felt that day when he had to leave his own home. Roxanne says, today I got kicked out of school and I did a lot of things I would not usually do, and I really hate myself. All I ever do is mess up, and I hate my mother, and I don't know how to let it go, and I feel all alone. I hate myself for what has happened to Jennifer and I'll always ask myself, why did I let it happen to us? I wish I was a better person, one in which my parents would not be ashamed of, and one in which they could love and cherish for always. I feel as if my heart has been crushed and will never be repaired. I wish I was as strong inside as everyone thinks I am. I am scared to sleep. I am scared to wake up. I feel as like if I get close to anyone, they will hurt me, so I always push them away. And I also feel if I don't meet a certain standard, they will leave me. So I always center the attention around me. Roxanne is pouring her heart out, something that she had to leave that day from school, from that situation. And she is pouring her heart out saying, I don't know why all this is happening to me, but this is how I feel. This is real to me, and I do not know where to go or where to turn. Like I said, there was abuse that happened in their family. And it's so sad for me to see that a child feels that it's their fault that they did not do anything because it wasn't their responsibility. And Roxanne and Jennifer had to feel the hurt and the trauma and the abuse that has happened. And this is their heart right now. How does Ishmael feel in this situation? When he is with his mother all alone in the desert, and his mother doesn't even know if they're going to make it. Everything looks hopeless. Everything looks like it's not going to be good for them. And what does God do? God hears the cry of Hagar. He hears the cry of Ishmael. And he comes and he says, do not be afraid, because I heard the cry of Ishmael, and I am going to take care of you. And then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. And so she went and filled the skin with water and gave the boy a drink. God was with the boy as he grew up. He lived in the desert and became an archer. And while he was living in the desert of Paran, his mother got a wife for him from Egypt. Ultimately, this story, this life of Ishmael and of Abraham and of Sarah and of Isaac and of Hagar and this family that's dysfunctional has the ultimate story of salvation. Despite the failures in this family, despite the meanness and the hurtfulness and the unfaithfulness, God saves this family. I mean, do we realize to the core what this means is that even in dysfunctional families, even where it's messed up and our lives are messed up and how much they've become, that God is always at work to bring something good out of a mess. Even a child who had to be sent away from his home, God hears their cry. We can't earn His favor, and we can certainly do anything to deserve it. But there is a grace that comes to us. If we would have kept reading Matthew 18, we read, the kingdom of God belongs to little children. If we would have kept reading that, there would have been the story of the lost sheep. And you remember that story. The shepherd leaves the 99 to go find that one sheep that's out there. And when he finds it, he rejoices over that one sheep than over the 99 that left. And then there is the verse 14 of Matthew 18, that to me just speaks so clearly to the heart of who our Father God is. It says, in the same way, your Father in heaven is not willing that any of these little ones should perish or should be lost. That is who our God is. He sees the widow. He sees the foreigner. He sees the fatherless. And we are to be the people to care for them, to love them, to be there for them. Are we going to be the church? And I know you haven't forgotten this. I can see it in everything that you do. Are we going to be a children of God who take care of these people? Because Abraham and Sarah forgot that. Abraham and Sarah, the faithful people of God, they forgot that. And because of that situation, a son and a mother had to leave their own home. But I know your hearts, and I know you have a care for them. I want to share a story with you. There's many stories of children at Foster's home. I want to share this story with you. His name is Andrew. I got to see Andrew over the years. And Andrew holds a special place in my heart. Andrew came to Foster's home when he was 8 years old. He came, literally, his grandmother was dragging him to the office, and he was yelling and kicking and screaming, saying, "You can't tell me what to do. I don't want to be here. This is, you take me back home. This is not for me," and so on and so forth. And his grandmother said, "Andrew, I'm sorry. I'm done with you. I can't take care of you any longer." We put Andrew in a home and kept having that same attitude. "You can't tell me what to do. I don't want to be here," and so on and so forth. And that went on for 6 months. And we didn't know if Andrew was going to make it. Until he started working with our animal program. And you see Andrew with his first pig up on the top left. He named his pig Corky. He had to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning to take care of this pig. He had to walk this pig. He had to feed this pig. He had to come after school and make sure everything was fine. And he created a bond with this pig. He started to love this pig. And he realized a special connection. And his life changed and realized, maybe that's what my caregivers want to show me. And take care of me. And Andrew becomes a great kid. He changes his life. He becomes a Christian at Bible camp years later. And then in 2008, he decides he wants to show a steer. He gets very involved with our animal program. Every year he has an animal. And he grows up with us. We see his work. We see that he's ready for it. And he says, "I want to show a steer. Can you help me with that?" And so in 2008, he's our first child to show a steer. And if you know what that means, that's a lot of work. If you've ever done that before. And he's all excited. He gets a steer and he calls me up and he says, "Titus, come. I have my steer. Come to the barn. Come look at it." So I come and I take this picture here and I ask him, I say, "Andrew, you always have great names for your for your animals. What are you going to call your steer?" And he said, "I'm going to call him Andrew Jr. or AJ for short." And I ask him, "Why Andrew Jr.?" And he says, "Because Titus, I see so much of myself in this steer. This is the first day I have him, and you know what he does? He doesn't listen to anything I say. He bucks at everything. He pulls me around and drags me. He said, that was exactly me when I first came here. But he said that's going to change. And Andrew poured his life into this steer and changed this steer to where in 2009 he won second place at the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo with his steer. We don't know a lot about Ishmael after that time in the desert when he was sent away. We know he grows up. We know he becomes an archer. We know he becomes a husband to a wife. And we know he becomes a leader of a nation because God promises that. This is what happens when grace and salvation meets dysfunctionality. It takes a life like Andrew's, who grew up on the streets of Fort Worth, who grew up driving his mother from pothouse to pothouse to keep her alive when he was only 8 years old. A child who has to live with his grandmother, gets sent away from his grandmother, comes to us. And grace and the love of Christ is shown to him what can happen. And now he grows up. No matter how dysfunctional our families are, or how messed up our lives may be, God is always at work. Always at work. Not just an hour, not just a second, not just a month, not just yesterday. He is always at work to bring something good out of a mess. And that is something we cannot do. I'm going to leave you with 1 Corinthians 15. I can see your lives. I can see you're a church that cares for and loves everyone. And so I just want to share with you 1 Corinthians 15 as a blessing for you, to remind you to continue to do that. The sting of death is sin, and the strength of sin is the law. But thanks be to God who gives us the victory through our Lord Jesus Christ. Therefore, my beloved brethren, be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that your labor is not in vain in the Lord. That is a promise that we have to continue the work that we're doing. I want to share this last little letter from one of our children at Foster's home. I like Foster's because the people there take care of me and it's fun. We go to Walmart and we can watch TV and I like it. I've been to 4 foster homes and this one's the 5th. And out of all of them, I like this one. Remember I told you before, a lot of our children go from home to home, live in with different families. How would you feel if you had to do that? This is very real to them. They share that. I like this one because we are safe. And this is what makes them feel safe. We have an alarm, so if someone breaks in, it will go off and we will know someone's in the house or someone is trying to run away. Something as simple as an alarm makes this child feel safe. You can rollerblade, you can ride your bikes, you can play baseball, and we have cattle and we can eat them. Didn't I tell you earlier, children are very honest? They tell you what they're thinking. I wish we had horses, but we don't. But I just like it. What can happen when grace and salvation meet dysfunctionality? It is something that God has created. And it's beautiful to watch. Because God is always at work in the lives of people. You know what God's soft spot in his heart is? Who it is? It's people. And there's a compassion there that sometimes we can't replicate, but God has it. And it's our turn to love, to care, and to share that with others. Think about your own lives, your own hearts. I pray that we're not like Abraham and Sarah. That it doesn't come to the point where we have to send someone away from our family. But we do have a God that has grace towards us. So as we have this time to sing together, to stand together, to think about our own hearts, I pray that we'll use this time to realize we cannot save ourselves. We cannot save our others. It is only through God working that will happen. Thank you again. You've been wonderful to us. You've been so inviting and hospitable. Like I said, I can see the grace that you have for people, and I hope that will continue as you touch and as you work with so many others, people in this area. God bless you. Let's stand together and let's sing.